These are systems, these are toolkits. It's like we're not ever going to have an input metric that isn't associated with an output metric. And then we're going to take a look at the correlation and we're going to try and figure out where the problems are. Hey, real quick at the top here, I've got a quick ask. We've put a short listener survey to keep the show interesting and useful for you. It's built with AI. It just takes a few minutes and we're going to read every single reply. We appreciate your feedback, what you want us to cover, positives, negatives, places we can take the show in a better direction. We really appreciate it. Check it out in the show notes. Welcome back to the Tropical MBA podcast, everybody, where we help you build a business online and hopefully getting more time, flexibility, location freedom, and building wealth in the process. To join me, we've got somebody who's done it, the boss man. Welcome to the program.
Yo.
It's been a little while since we talked.
Been better, let me say that. Found some disturbing news this weekend that I figured I'd share with you and the listeners of this show. At a dinner party, not too many of us there, okay? But of the men at this dinner party, and there were men and women, of the men at this dinner party, what percentage would you say dyed their hair and their beard?
Well, based on the setup, I'm going to guess that it's a very high percentage and
Correct.
That we don't know about this emerging marketplace.
Correct. So found out that a large percentage of the people at this party in their 40s and 50s had been dyeing their facial hair and their hair on a regular basis. I sit there thinking for the last, I don't know, I've known these people for a while, 5 or 10 years, that I'm the only one dyeing, perhaps, because of the shade of my hair. Look, I don't care if you dye your hair. I think that's great.
That's great. It's cool.
I understand that's important to a lot of people, but I am upset because I didn't know about it. Okay? Not that I want to do it for myself, but I thought my health was declining faster than yours.
I can understand why that would put your weekend into tumult.
Let me just say this last thing about it, though. There's an opportunity here, a business opportunity, and that's what this show's all about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found out the number one brand for doing this procedure to yourself is still the same brand that existed in the 80s and 90s that I was familiar with. Do you remember what it is?
Just for Men.
Exactly. That's still the leading brand. How is that possible?
Incredible business durability, my friend, which we're going
That's
to
right.
talk about today. What an excellent segue. I must mention, while we're talking about weekends, my last weekend was ridiculously amazing because the family went out of town. So I got to do all my stuff.
Yep.
I went on a big old bike ride. I went out to dinner at a bar. What else did I do? I built a guitar pedal board. I practiced guitar. It was a dorm room. The house turned into a dorm room. It was an incredible weekend. My main takeaway, Ian, I like being a dad. It was like good for a couple of days. It's like, all right, I'm bored now.
That's good. It's like you were living in your 20s, but you had money.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to Guitar Center and I bought something. It was nice.
Yeah. Instead of just playing all the guitars.
Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
All right. Speaking of buying stuff, we got to make some money. We got to grow some better businesses. Let's talk about how to do it. We're going to cover a bunch of topics today. But first, I want to talk about a tricky thing about business metrics. We all run our business on metrics, and they can cause as many problems as they solve. They're absolutely crucial, but it's interesting that their same power can cause and cast a shadow that we have to manage as leaders and as systems designers and as entrepreneurs. Let's talk about how metrics can drive us off the rails. Because we talk about the positive side of metrics, and internally and with friends, when we're hanging out, we're talking about how metrics can actually create liabilities in businesses, and they can create strange incentives. So this is actually such an important phenomenon. There is a name for it with a whole Wikipedia listing. It is called Goodhart's law, and Goodhart's law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So the example they give on the Wikipedia page, somewhere in India at some point, there were so many cobras that the government decides, hey, if you bring us a dead cobra, we will pay you. This is now a way to make some extra money and to help everybody out because we got to get rid of these cobras.
Yeah, it's a problem.
So how do the entrepreneurs respond?
Breeding cobras.
Building cobra farms.
Yeah.
And going the opposite direction, making more cobras so that they can then kill them and get the payout.
Yeah.
We see this kind of phenomenon all over. You see it in education, for example, where if a school gets money from the government, uh, because of their graduation rate, say, for example, there's ways that they can kind of gamify the graduation rate to present those numbers. And the interesting thing is like, well, what's that distance between a goal and a metric? Because the metric was graduation rate, but that's an abstraction of the goal of having children that are ostensibly ready for higher education or the workforce. But it's actually, now we're just cheating the system and we're not even focused on educating them for whatever's next. We're simply focused on the graduation rate, which turns out wasn't that tightly aligned with what the goal was. And that's what I think. It's like sort of a game of pop-a-mole. Every time you put up a metric, there is this shadow. If you say it's super, super important that you achieve a certain number, a common one in the SaaS world where you'll go to your customer service representatives and you'll say, every ticket needs to be responded to within X number of minutes or hours. Well, now the quality can dip because the customer service team understands that that's how they're being judged. Their goal is to keep their job. And so I am going to do this even if the quality deteriorates. This is really interesting because it can even happen at the very highest levels of a business where you choose really good metrics like profit, like revenue, like referability or referral rate. And all of a sudden, the fact that you chose the metric creates a shadow. And now you're borrowing from some future in order to meet the short-term metric and maybe losing sight of the goal in general.
These goals and these metrics are really important, right? This is like what we're here for is we're trying to meet a goal, whether it's personal or business.
Yeah.
So in some way they have to exist, but I think what you're saying is like they can become the object of the game and then gamified and then no longer useful. So a lot of these things, they might be very important for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Meaning this is our goal for the year. This is a goal for the 6 months, right? And then you see in all the ways in which people kind of meet the goal. In a lot of the cases, like people don't gamify at first, right? Like it can be like an honest effort to try and meet the goal. And you say like, look, we can't piss our customers off or we can't reduce our profit margin, whatever it is, right? And people get creative and they figure out a way to meet the goal. But then the problem arises once they get good at that and then they start making these optimizations or these trade-offs.
You're talking about the L word, okay? And it's not love, it's leadership. And so let's talk about 6 ways you can address this challenge. So we agree there is a challenge if you run a company and you've over-focused on a metric for a period of time, you've felt the shadow, probably. You know, you said we need to get 15 calls this month, and then all of a sudden, people are booking anybody on the calendar, right? And so what do we do about this challenge? So point number 1, the leadership thing. Revisit the brand promise every week. What is the brand promise to the customers? And what is the brand promise to the team members? You know, what does it mean to work here? What are we doing? And what does this brand mean to the customers? This is the start with the why stuff. And how often do we talk about it? Every week on Friday morning on our call. So maybe we don't go into a deep dive every week, but it's like, hey, we aren't here to get 15 phone calls this month.
Yep.
We're here to connect entrepreneurs, a certain type of entrepreneur, and you can go down the rabbit hole as far as you want in terms of what brand elements are included and what aren't. This is like long-term insulation from team members getting myopic about metrics. It's like one big antidote to over-focus and over-optimization on a metric that, as Goodhart's law says, will cease to be an effective measure when people start to over-optimize for it. Number 2 is determine a countervailing metric. So this is like a metric that manages the shadow. You recognize it right away. Like if you're going to book 15 calls a month, the booking of said calls needs to meet these basic requirements. And sophisticated companies like get very sophisticated about countervailing. Like if surveyed after call, customer cannot be unhappy that we're asked to get on a call. So like an annoyance would be something you want to have as a countervailing. Like you can't annoy people in order to get them on this important metric. You can't violate the brand promise. You can't send more than X outreach every week to any given person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a common business principle that's like worth revisiting. If you're putting metrics on people's plates, are you delivering those metrics with important caveats that aren't just there to be gamed, but are there to help them understand the goal that you're going for?
The goal, and also I think it's important to keep in mind the first point, which is the brand promise. None of the ways in which people show up to this call can ruin our brand promise, our reputation, or our image. Any like ball sport, right? Basketball, football, soccer. The goal is the goal, right? But there's a bunch of different rules in which you have to follow to get the ball in the goal that make it a sport. Otherwise, it's not a sport, right? So there are these countervailing metrics or these rules around the metrics that make it work and make it worth watching and playing.
Well, it's an interesting analogy because, you know, you've heard the story of the player who plays for the metrics so that they can get a better contract next year versus does the right thing to advance the ball into the goal as a team.
Yeah.
And what these sports leagues are trying to do is to get a more sophisticated understanding. How do we value a player beyond these simple metrics? How do we define more sophisticated metrics that gets a sense for what their true win share is versus the person who caught the ball the most times or whatever? And it's the same thing we're trying to do on our company, which is we're trying to score, we're trying to win. And if we're not really having this discussion with our team members, and the discussion is all about, this is your scorecard, this is your metric, hit it and you still have a job and you get a better contract. That is where you're introducing potentially some risk into the business in terms of winning. And so I think that this type of discussion that we're having right now is a type of discussion you want to have with your teammates, which is like, hey, like this is the situation with metrics. I Googled Goodhart's law. It's a problem. Like these are tools that are supposed to get us in the goal, right? The goal isn't to simply hit the metric. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Point number 3. We talked a lot about like determining a North Star metric. The interesting thing about a North Star metric, it is a hypothesis about an input that will lead to the type of output goals that you want, the type of results that you want. So simply, instead of going, this is the metric and this is the countervailing metric, another way to manage this challenge of Goodhart's law is to have an input and an output metric. Imagine this is what MBAs talk about. You know, these are systems, these are toolkits. It's like we're not ever going to have an input metric that isn't associated with an output metric. And then we're going to take a look at the correlation and we're going to try and figure out where the problems are.
This is part of the way in which our scorecard is built out.
Yeah.
So the input metrics are like your best guess, and then the output metric is what the goal is. And the input metrics are changing, which brings us to point number 4.
Yeah, which is a metric refresh every 90 days. Like put it on your calendar, do your quarterly review, and have it be a discrete line item, which is like, I want to make sure that things aren't going off the rails because of the good intentions of the metrics that the team members are optimizing for.
Sometimes you can introduce something like a metric into your company, and at first it can seem silly, but it really like revolutionizes the company. So an example of this might be, depending on your business, we respond to everybody within 2 hours. And the reason you respond to everybody within 2 hours is because you're like 90% more likely to make the sale. So I do think that a lot of good can come from defining these types of metrics, but what you do with them going forward and the way that you kind of participate around the systems and the process can like make or break it for you.
It's almost like all that we're talking about here is that these are very powerful for good and for evil, for positive and for shadow. For most of us, when we introduce a new metric, a lot of good is going to happen in a short period of time. And then the value tends to decay, and then it tends to be counterproductive. That is essentially what the law I'm understanding is suggesting, and is the case studies that we're talking about and identifying that have sort of motivated us to have this conversation in the first place. So all of this can be mitigated with a pulse discipline.
Yeah.
That's point number 5. What is your pulse discipline? We talk about pulse as simply for every particular area of your business, you have it on your calendar when you're going to come and you're going to deal with that decision making. In the case of taxes, which we're talking about it once a year, maybe twice. Okay. So we don't need to talk about it every month. In terms of metrics, a lot of the challenges that I'm seeing and that we're experiencing could have been mitigated if we would have revisited all the metrics every 90 days with what we learned, because all the positive stuff happened. So now it's like you go back in, you have the open conversation with the leader and you say, hey, I know we talked about the 15 phone calls. What are the negative things that have come from this? Are people annoyed? Are they the right people coming to the calls? Is there something else we could introduce as a countervailing? Is there some terms we need to put to this? Is it still the right metric? And that's all we're talking about. We're engineering systems. It's going to be like really interesting at first. It's going to become slightly less interesting. And then people are going to completely optimize around that instead of the goal. And then it could create dysfunction or durability challenges in your future. Cool. So we want to revisit brand promise, determine countervailing, combine input and output, metric refresh every 90 days, have discipline around that. That's pulse discipline. The final one we put here is just like kind of advanced level that we're not at, but I've seen founders in the DC who have a just really, really sophisticated metric dashboard. And this is a kind of, you can kind of tell we're like in live process thinking through this. The word leadership popped into my mind, this idea of how important it is to have somebody on the team who's a leader, who's able to zoom in and zoom out, who's able to look at 100 metrics, look at very complicated dashboards and say, that's the one that's challenging us right now. That's the problem. If you can go on Amazon.com and get your product within 24 hours, it's going to revolutionize our business. That's the one. And sure, when Amazon did that, they introduced supply chain risk. So the leader who decided that there's one metric that really matters to Amazon customers, which is getting the product quickly, they were right about the revolutionary quality of that metric, but they were also right to manage the downstream negative effects that had. And it did have negative effects. I guess for me, the takeaway, Ian, is like metrics are critical. They're powerful. They help us run our businesses. We do it through a system of scoreboard every week. We do it through a system of scorecard on each individual team member's plates. But I think we were lagging a little bit on this pulse thing, this pulse discipline to go back in and dig in, have the open conversation, involve the team. Hey, are these metrics still right? What are the downsides here? How should we rejigger them to treat them as tools and to make sure that we all win as a team and meet the goal underneath the brand promise?
And the part where it's like contradicts itself, I think is a little bit difficult too to wrap your head around. We're just like, wait, I thought I needed goals and metrics. Now you're telling me that they don't matter, or that they can change, or that they can hurt my business. It's like,
there's like every good thing in life. Yeah, we need cookies, but there's a downside.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why they make protein cookies, man. You can feel good about your decisions.
All right. Let's put the metrics to bed for now. Next topic. We put up a tweet from Greg Eisenberg. He's a gentleman who posts a lot about business ideas on the web. And one of the ideas he writes is, my dream is to build this, so I'm putting it out there. What does an alt business school look like? Business school is broken. He goes on to describe the annoyance of case studies from the 90s. Business school doesn't even answer the question, how do you actually learn to build and sell something in 2026? He points to the fact that YC, Y Combinator, is incredible for venture-funded back startups, but there is no really like sort of path or school for how to do this the indie way, the alternative way, the Tropical MBA way, the Greg Eisenberg way, the Levels.io way. So my question to you, Ian, is if you were going to launch your own alt business school, what class would you teach?
Well, I was just going to say, we've only been doing this podcast for how many years now? 15?
I hate
almost.
to say the number.
This is essentially what we've been trying to do. So hopefully we've been able to achieve it. The problem is that it doesn't cost any money to go to our business school. And we might not be qualified either. So that's okay as well as professors. So the question though is, what would you like the program to look like, or what would be the thing that you would teach?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious for me, Dan, and I'd be interested to hear what your response is. But the simple answer for me is sales. It's probably one of the harder courses, I would imagine, because anyone can understand kind of how a product is made and the finances of it, and landed costs or CAC to LTV or whatever it is. But if you can't go out there and sell your product, there's no point in doing all those equations.
I remember even back in the day, like the 4-hour work week opens up with this concept of deal making. And he's talking about negotiating with reality, negotiating with your employer. Life is a series of deals kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And yeah, sales at its best. At its worst, it's a boiler room. At its best, it's a recognition that persuasion and building accord with others, finding ways to get people on board with things or delivering what they want is the kind of core of what starting a business is all about. In fact, like the first sales job, if you're going to start a product business, is you have to sell your manufacturer to work with you. The thing that I think is similar is personal finance. I think it's sorely, sorely lacking from the current college and high school experience. And we talked about the sacredness of the second bottom line last week, which is understanding that in order to build wealth, you need to capture value in terms of savings and also build equity in terms of assets. And so I think understanding how that works, case studies around that, how you can put it to test right away would be critical to any education. It's like, you're sending out buckets with holes in the bottom of them if you're teaching kids how to go make good salaries, but nothing about personal finance. That's the first thing. And then if someone called me in and was like, I think this concept of like impresario marketing is super fascinating. So how do you create a brand or an anonymous account or a personal brand that galvanizes buyers? What does that look like in 2026 versus 2020 versus 2015? Who's having success right now? Let's take a look at Sam Sulek. Let's take a look at how he does his YouTube videos, how he speaks to one person, 101 long form, and gets an incredible buying audience to the tune of millions of viewers a video. Like, what is the business value of that? How did you do it? How can we apply those lessons to the individuals in the class? The cool thing about doing a course on impresario marketing is that you can do the actual work right in class. We talked about like there's a difference between metrics and goals. Like one is a abstraction of the other. The cool thing about a modern bootstrapped university is that there would be no need for abstraction, that actually you would start the business in the class right away, which is interesting. If you're listening to this right now and you're in the 20% of the audience that does not own a business, you can start a business like by the end of this podcast. The reason most people don't do that is because they don't want to be in that particular business. They don't want, but they think the promise of whatever they can start right now is they want something else. And so I think the interesting thing is to hold the students to the task of, hey, this is the practice of entrepreneurship. You don't have to own this thing 40 years from now. Just start it right now. Get the reps in. You're going to start a lot of businesses. So go start one right now. Make some money, deliver the thing, get out of it, sell it, move on to the next thing, learn something. So anyway, I think that's one thing that's really exciting about the potential of a school like this is that you would learn by actually doing the thing right there. That would be cool.
The real coup in all this, of course, is to figure out how to finance it for people that can't afford it. So that's probably actually what I'm going to go into if I had to choose.
Cool. So final topic here, Ian. I guess we discovered a little growth hack. We had a lot of applications recently to the Dynamite Circle, and we dug into it and found that you were hiring a facilitator for DC Black. And the post went viral based on our standards. We got 700 applications so far for this job. It was like the best marketing our company's done in 6 months. So it's like the marketing team is like, wait a second, somebody's marketing really good here. Like, what's going on?
Post a couple other job ads.
Yes.
This week.
Just make these fake jobs. So what's going on here? I just curious, like, bring us up to date on what's the backstory here. Because we haven't talked about DC Black in a little while, so I think it'd be interesting just to share what's going on.
DC Black is the sub-community of the Dynamite Circle for 7- and 8-figure founders. So essentially, if you have a business in that realm, you can join this sub-community. And we've got a bunch of events throughout the year, private WhatsApp channels, etc., where everybody gets together and talks. But as it relates to the facilitator, we also have masterminds. So most of our members get together on a monthly call, somewhere around 6 to 7 people on that call. And these calls are facilitated by professional facilitators. And what that means is there's somebody in the room that guides the conversation. Sometimes they don't do a lot. Sometimes they do very little. It just kind of depends on the conversation. But their job is to essentially, contribute in the way that they basically encourage participation and get the most out of people or get the best out of people, right? So it's like sometimes you can show up, Dan, and you can be taking care of your family and your business and this and that, and maybe feel like you don't have much to share, but then all of a sudden have everything to share and kind of take over the call because everybody figured out that you have the biggest problem in the room. So it's a facilitator's job to kind of figure that out and to make sure that these calls are productive for everybody.
Most of our facilitators are essentially semi-retired founders who've
Correct.
Exited. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that we look for to facilitate these calls are in a position where they're maybe post-economic, or you don't have to understand how all these businesses work, but it's definitely an advantage if you've had businesses over the years.
Yeah.
Because you can understand where people are at in their business and you can ask the right kind of questions, or you can connect them with other people on your calls. So most of our facilitators, they facilitate like 4 to 8 of these calls a month. And it becomes really cool because they could say, oh, Dan's having this problem, I'm going to connect them with this other person. Or, oh, I know this attorney, you should talk to them. So they can also be like kind of a super connector. And I think, to be in that position, most of the time you've had a career, you've had a bunch of experiences like that. We got a bunch of applications. We're still going through them, but yeah, I'll mention it. Specifically, we're looking for someone at this point because we've gotten so many applications for other time zones. Specifically, now we're looking for somebody in Asia that can help us out. So if you happen to be in Asia and you meet the criteria, this sounds exciting to you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at ian@dynamitecircle.com and I will respond directly to you.
Cool. That's it for this week. We appreciate your emails. We appreciate you listening. We talked about some sort of theoretical stuff. We have a bunch of worksheets and resources. You talked about, we've been talking about this for a long time. We'll talk about personal finance. We'll talk about sales, marketing stuff. If you go to tropicalmba.com/resources, we publish a lot of documents there, all for free. No email address required. Cool. That's it for this week. Ian, thanks for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next Thursday morning as is per the usual.
See you then.